Good morning, Boker Tov. On Sunday morning, today is the 8th day of the month of Tammuz, and let's, as we always begin, with the mitzvah of giving some tzedakah, so we elicit some blessing from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from God Almighty, to merit to have to say the right words, in both inspiring both myself and those who are listening. So over here we are just gave some tzedakah, and may Hashem bless us to be able to do so in sharing the right words. So I struggled a little bit whether we should discuss this topic, as we the topic about the attempted assassination of the former president, because anytime you discuss politics, there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of strong emotional feelings that people have when it comes to politics. And in general, I don't think it's the role of a rabbi to discuss politics for that. At least definitely not in public, maybe in private, because it can be alienating. But and our role and job is to teach Torah. For political commentary, there are so many that are out there that have opinions and are more informed than we are. But based on what the Baal Shem Tov teaches us, that every single thing that we hear or see is a lesson in our service to the Almighty and so on, I do think that it is important for us to discuss the issues from a Torah perspective and the lessons that can be learned with the objective to bring it down into sort of practical improvement of who we are individually and as a society. And therefore, I will not, or as best as possible, I will not discuss this from a political perspective, although it deserves discussion. I will discuss it more from a Torah perspective, and what is to be our response, again, from that perspective. So, yesterday, something very sad happened, regardless of which side you are on the political thinking or opinion, and as should be, was strongly condemned by all upstanding and good Americans, as our country is, regardless of opinion and position. And there are various thoughts on that, but I want to first go, and which I will get to, hopefully, God willing. I want to first, by way of introduction and setting the tone, discuss this from a Torah Parsha perspective, as this is a Torah class. So first I want to discuss an incident in the Parsha. It's a fairly known incident, even to those who are maybe less familiar with Torah learning, Bible learning. And I want to apply that to the situation that we are in, or the story that occurred yesterday, and the lesson to be learned. So in the Torah portion of last week, we learned about the known story of while the Jews were in the desert on their travels and about to enter into Israel. This was at the end of 40 years of their wandering and traveling in the desert. They're ready to go into the land. And the Torah tells us a story that already occurred many years earlier, where after the passing of Miriam being the sister of Moses, and we are told that it was in her merit that the miraculous Be'er, which is referred to as Be'er Shel Miriam, the well of Miriam, the water that flowed from a rock that provided water for the nation of Israel while they were in the desert, was there in the merit of Miriam. And when Miriam passed away, that water stopped flowing from the rock, and as a result, they came to Moses and they asked Moses that we need water. The Torah relates, and just to share the story briefly, the Torah relates that as a result, that the Torah relates, they came to Moses, and God says to Moses that you should take the stick, and the words that the Torah uses is v'dibartem el hasela, you should speak to the rock. Moses gathers the people, he tells them harsh words, Shimu na hamorim, listen to me, you rebellious ones. Will I be able to bring forth from this rock? And then Moshe goes ahead and he hits the rock twice, and water comes flowing out. And then the Torah continues that God is very disappointed with Moses, and he says to him that because you refuse to sanctify me in front of my people, in front of my children, you will not come and enter into the Holy Land. And this is the story, very briefly. There are more details if you read the Parsha, but the Torah is somewhat ambiguous. What was the wrongdoing of Moses over here, which warranted this sort of harsh punishment that he was now, after leading the Jewish people out of Egypt, after leading them for 40 years, after enduring all the kvetching and the challenges of Israel for 40 years, and his deepest desire to enter into the land of Israel, he's punished that he cannot come into the land. What was the punishment? It's not 100% clear in the text what was Moses' wrongdoing over here that warranted this punishment. Now, there are various answers given amongst the great commentaries, the Rambam, Rashi, and others, but the most known explanation is the one of Rashi. Rashi, the great sort of uber commentary on the Torah, says that if you pay attention to the language in the Torah, first God says to Moshe, "V'dibartem el hasela," you should speak to the rock, and Moses hits the rock. And it is this cardinal sin that causes Moses not to enter into the land of Israel. What was this sin? What was this problem? Why did this cause that God's name should not be sanctified amongst the children of Israel? So Rashi explains that would Moshe have spoken to the rock, the children of Israel would have learned a lesson that if a rock is spoken to and it does God's word, how much more so, and it obeys and listens, how much more so that we should obey and listen to that which God tells us. So this is the famous Rashi's explanation. And, there are people who struggle with this answer on various levels, including of why is it that Moses receives such a harsh punishment, and there are answers given. I'm not here going to extensively discuss this. I'm only going to discuss it as it relates to our discussion and our question of what is this lesson in relationship to the occurrence, the very tragic occurrence of what happened, the shocking occurrence of what happened yesterday, the attempted assassination of a former president. And I specifically say the attempted assassination of a former president to sort of move away, at least for this discussion, for this Torah discussion. It is not relevant who the attempted assassination was against. And I want to make it clear, when I say it's not relevant, I don't mean as a general discussion it's not relevant. It might very well be relevant, but for the sake of our discussion, what is relevant in our discussion here today is that an assassination attempt on a former president, regardless of who that person is, whether he represents this ticket or that ticket, it's just the act of an attempted assassination against a leader, against a person that represents a thinking that you might disagree with. That is the discussion over here. So, amongst the explanations given, and let me backtrack for a second, lest you think that this is an incident that happened just shy of 3,500 years ago. The story of Moses speaking to the rock or Moses hitting the rock versus speaking to the rock, and it has no effects on us today. That is not the case, because the Medrashe Chazal, our sages tell us that this act caused Moses not to go into the land of Israel, says the Medrash and Chazal and Kabbalah and so on, Jewish mysticism, that would Moses have been allowed to take the Jews into Israel, the exile and the destruction of Jerusalem and Israel would never have happened. And as a result, the diaspora that we find ourselves for all these years until today would not have occurred. So this act is sort of monumental in its ramifications, in its consequences. All the struggles and sorrows that we have today is as a result of that mistake or that act of Moses, whether it's a mistake or not, but that act which God criticized Moses over has its ramifications for all of our history. So what's the message here, and what's the relevance to what we're discussing over here? So amongst the commentaries, one of the commentaries says the following, that let's analyze this story a little deeper. What is so terrible that Moses hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock? We find that at the beginning of the travels from Egypt, towards Israel, over there Moses is told by God to hit the rock. So, okay, it's years later, God tells him to speak to the rock, but he hit the rock. It's not the first time that he was told to hit the rock. Now, why he decided to hit the rock versus speaking to the rock is something that Rashi explains. If you want to know more, send me a comment and we will explain. So one of the commentaries says something very interesting, and I want to add to that. I want to add a thought to that, or sort of elaborate on that a little bit. He says, at the beginning of the journey of the Jewish nation, or of a human being, an individual, ourselves, our children, over there, it is justified and sometimes warranted to hit the rock. Metaphorically, what that means is that discipline and imposing and instructing and telling and threatening sometimes and punishing is what is necessary. In fact, King Solomon says, Chosech shifto, so never know. One who withholds the rod hates his child. You cannot have a child growing up in an environment where they're always just allowed to do whatever they want, whatever they think is right, without any proper disciplinary, sometimes, guidance. That's the beginning of the journey. That's the beginning of the development, whether it's in years or in where you're holding spiritually and in your knowledge and understanding of your personal sort of spiritual Jewish growth. But later on, as you further develop, the objective and the goal is not to coerce or hit the rock, but to speak to the rock. Because the ultimate goal and objective of true transformation happens when you could inspire and you could influence. I heard a story I heard the story several times that Herman Walker, a very famous writer in the 70s or 80s, once in a private audience with the Rebbe, said to the Rebbe, he was arguing about influencing American Jewry into becoming closer to their heritage and so on. And he sort of expressed himself to the Rebbe. He says, Lubavitcher Rebbe or Chabad Rebbe, do you think you could tell American Jews what to do? Meaning, in the old country where people were raised more with a dictatorship, kings, and so on, okay, that works. But in the United States of America, which is based on freedom of expression, and where everybody does what they want to do and so on, do you think you could tell American Jews how to behave religiously, Jewishly, ethically, and so on? And the Rebbe responded and said like this, American Jews, he says, you can't tell them anything, but you could teach them everything. If you properly speak to them, teach them, inspire them, that from within they become connected, appreciate, learn, study what the Torah has to tell us, what our beautiful tradition has to teach us, what God's word have to tell us, you could teach them everything. So here, this is the deeper meaning, what God is saying to Moshe Rabbeinu: the people are not ready to enter Israel under your leadership in the proper way, in a way that will be everlasting. Because when you impose something on an individual, he might listen to you or she might listen to you, but you have not transformed them. It is necessary at the beginning stage to have that discipline. But ultimately, if you want real transformation, if you want everlasting transformation, you need to speak to them. You need to penetrate that it becomes something that they appreciate. And if you haven't done that, they're not ready for the eternal inheritance of the land of Israel and what it represents, sort of spiritually and metaphorically. This is very relevant to us today, as we are the generation, as the Rebbe told us, where we're at the end of the journey of the diaspora. It is ripe for that time of the fulfillment of the prophecies of our prophets, of a transformed, better world. It is only that right before it gets light, it is the darkest time of the night, and that's why we see much spiritual and ethical darkness that's out there. Although it's not the majority, meaning it's just the louder voices, because it is the final battles of darkness before the light breaks forth. But the lesson is here in the following. Politically, of course, and there's been much discussion that when it comes to campaigning and it comes to elections and so on, that we should pray and we should inspire, that the campaign should be about issues, not about people, not about attacking people and so on. But that discussion is an important discussion, but there's a more important discussion. The more important discussion is that whenever you see a malady, whenever you see a problem, whenever you see an illness, you could deal with the symptoms, you could take a Tylenol, you could take an Advil, or you could deal with the root cause. So in this country, there's a passionate, and maybe beyond passionate, discussion about violence and gun violence, and whether there should be more gun restriction, whether it's a mental health issue, and that needs to be addressed. Perhaps both of it needs to be addressed. But basing myself on the teachings of my holy Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who we just celebrated his yahrzeit this past week, who already in the 70s and the 80s pleaded with our society and foresaw some of this sad decline. We are not, whether it's the mental health issue, whether it's the gun violence issue, whether it's the political rhetoric and heated rhetoric and hate spewing division, whether it's on mainstream media or social media, these issues are valid discussions and need to be addressed, but it does not address the core issue. It does not address the core issue. The core issue is how we are educating ourselves and our children. How do we view a human being? What is the makeup of a human being, and what is the proper way to educate a human being and to develop a human being? Since sort of the 1970s, we have thrown God, our creator, out of schools, and more and more pushed them out of society. We have focused that education and higher education is about acquiring knowledge, skill, degree, and how we use that degree just to satisfy our comforts, etc. But the truth of how we develop our children. Not everybody. This is not a statement for everybody, but this is an underlying sort of illness that exists in our society. We have thrown out the core values of holiness, godliness, tradition, Torah, that has worked for thousands of years and produced good people, produced productive people, produced dedicated people, produced selfless people, people who value someone else's life, who value their own life. Because there's purpose, there's absolute purpose, and there's absolute value for every individual. When we throw that out and everybody can make their own decision of what's right and wrong without the proper basic education and guidelines how to get there, unfortunately, we're raising animals. We're raising just people who are almost no different than a hippopotamus. Feels good, I'll wallow in the mud. Anybody who gets in my way doesn't deserve to exist. It's all about my own self-gratification and existence. There are levels, there are degrees to this, but the core problem, again, mental health, gun violence, political hatred, they have existed before. Is it worse than before? Perhaps. But what has not existed is or has been a war against, is these principles of what the founding of our country has been upon. The founders of our country were believers. In fact, they ran away from wherever they were because of political persecution. And they wanted a country that's not devoid of religion, where often people make the mistake based on separation of religion and state, that the founding fathers in the Constitution wanted a country that's devoid of religion, devoid of God. That cannot be true. The reason they came is so that they could practice their religion. They only wanted that the government should allow and not persecute or choose one religion over the other. But a basic belief in God, in a creator, in a supreme being, in someone who watches and knows what you do, so that if you're smart and you could outsmart the policeman, like this fellow who climbs up on a roof and goes to a spot which is out of the line, as the news reports are showing, out of the line because of a tree of the snipers who are protecting the former president. So here is a fellow who, again, we don't know much details about this individual, but the concept of all I need to do, whether it's crime in the streets, whether it's hurting somebody else, whether it's stealing from someone else, my job is just to avoid being caught. But if it's in the kishkis, as we say in Yiddish, if it's inculcated, if it's drilled in, if it's part of you, v'dibartem el hasela, it's spoken to the rock, that it's not only something that's imposed upon you, but it becomes part of who you are and your appreciation of that there is an ayin roya, there's always an eye that watches. There's somebody greater than myself that I'm responsible to. Then it's not just about avoiding punishment, avoiding consequences, satisfying myself. I have meaning, both in the negative and not negative, both in the don'ts and the do's. There are things I don't do, I can't do. It's not mine. It's off limits for me. It's not just whatever feels good. I go ahead and satisfy those needs, and it's in the positive. I'm valuable. I'm most valuable because God created me. I'm indispensable, and I have purpose, and I have meaning. That is where the focus should be. We focus on secondary things. We focus, okay, gun violence, yes or no? Gun control, yes or no? Maybe, I'm not saying you shouldn't deal with that, but that's not the more important core issue. Mental health. Mental health, yes, we need to deal with that, of course. But that's not, even somebody who's, God forbid, mentally disturbed, unfortunately and sadly, often, if they are raised even from childhood with certain positive values and role models around them, they're acting out in their disturbed mental health situation or in their depression situation would not be in such a violent manner. So this is the message from Moshe Rabbeinu's mistake. I don't want to use the word mistake because we're talking about Moses. But the message over here that v'dibartem al hasela, when we see something of this nature, in addition to many other things that you might analyze, and maybe correctly so, this is an important message and a wake-up call to us as a society, to us as parents, to us as individuals, that the v'dibartem al hasela, to speak to the rock, to speak to our children, to elevate, to influence, to transform our children positively. A human being, as explained in Kabbalah and in Tanya, is comprised of an animalistic soul and a godly soul. And there's a constant battle between those two. And we have the ability, we have the mind to be able to train and teach ourselves. And interesting, the story here was about the water, bringing forth water. Torah is compared to water. How does one train and inspire themselves and those around them to connect to God, to connect to Torah values? It's through learning Torah. And today we're blessed. There's so much, it's almost like a miracle how much water comes forth from everywhere and anywhere. Connect in a way that it's not something that's imposed, that you're doing because you have to do, but something that you love to do. Find a part in the Torah which talks to you, resonates with you. And then by doing so, you will then teach your children, your friends, social acquaintances in a positive, accepting way. And that's how it is, that light, that infinite, powerful, godly light that will transform our nation, that we should never, never have to deal with this kind of violence. Whether it is a former president, whether it is, sadly, someone in the audience that lost their life, whether it's just anybody walking down the street anywhere in our country or throughout the world, may it be merit that we never have to deal with this kind of pain and violence. We should only be able to see how society is slowly, or maybe not slowly, maybe quickly, reaching what we call a positive boiling point to start dealing with these core underlying issues for the betterment of our society, for the transformation of our society, which then we will achieve what Moses began but didn't complete, which is the leading society as a whole sort of to the promised land that the prophets tell us, where there will be no more, where the nations of the world will put down they will put down their knives, they'll put down their weapons, and we will all live in a holy and good and positive world where there will be no war, there will be no death, there will only be positivity, holiness, goodness, kindness. And you might think this is a pipe dream. It's not. The reason why it's not is because it is something that is told to us in the Torah and the prophets. So it is told to us by our Creator, and He knows us best. And if He has these expectations, He knows that it can be achieved and that we have the ability to achieve it. But we could start with one light at a time, one person around us at a time. May we be successful, and may we merit to see so immediately and speedily. And that is what we mean when we bless ourselves, that may we merit and see the coming of Mashiach speedily nowadays. May all who need to heal, whether it's physically, spiritually, emotionally, receive a quick healing, and everybody should have a wonderful, blessed week.